Are you sheltering in place, isolated, feeling alone? Well, then you're just like us.
Hit me.
From Studio P in Sausalito, the home of the quarantined hit, it's time for... Succotash Shut-In, the Soundcast Stimulus Package featuring snippets from comedy...
Soundcasts.
And now, here's your host for this episode, Marc Hershon.
Hi, I am Marc Hershon. Thanks for dropping by. And thank you, Bill Haywatt, our fabulous booth announcer, for all 9.5 years of this Soundcast that you have been with us and on it so far. In honor of the pandemic, well, that doesn't sound quite right. Because of the pandemic, we've repositioned ourselves as Succotash Shut-In, the Soundcast Stimulus Package. Mostly because we saw that the ratings for Soundcasts, or podcasts, as older folks refer to them, has dropped precipitously. So we're cranking these things out once a week now, regular as a guy with a double espresso and a pint of prune juice. If you missed last week, episode 216, you didn't get to hear my co-host Tyson Saner share clips from a trio of shows, including Trashy Trashy, Deluxe Edition, yet another pop culture podcast, and I Don't Want to Talk About Fight Club Anymore. You can still grab it at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever fine soundcasts appear, including our home site, SuccotashShow.com. This show's not all about comedy soundcast clips, no sir, or ma'am. We sometimes do our own thing, like the Sleeve Talkers pilot episode we featured a couple of months ago. And we like to talk to soundcasters and comedians soundcasters and other showbiz folk. Hell, I'll talk to a carny if the chance presents itself. But today, for Epi217, we've got a very special guest. He's a comedian, an actor, a writer, a director, a producer, a father, a son, a husband, maybe a member of the Illuminati, but more than anything, he is a soundcaster too, just like me, and probably just like you. Mike Birbiglia joins us today. We're going to talk about his latest soundcast. He's had a few. And working it out with Mike Birbiglia has been getting some rave notices from me, for one, as I reviewed a recent episode for This Week in Comedy podcasts on Vulture.com. The premise of the show is that he has interesting, creative guests on, and he talks to them about their lives, but also what it is they're working on right now. Why don't I play a little taste of that episode I reviewed first, then we'll jump into my chat with Mike. Here he's talking with guest Roy Woods Jr., a funny comedian you may recognize from The Daily Show and from a ways back, Last Comic Standing. Mike wants to hear Roy doing stories about his own life, which Roy is not entirely comfortable with, but he is willing to give it a shot.
Maybe I'm overstepping, but I really do feel like you should write a solo show off Broadway about your life. Does that interest you?
Yeah, it does. It's the problem. I don't know if you ever noticed with my stand-up, I don't talk about myself.
Yeah, I know, man.
I talk about the world. I talk about my thoughts and analysis on the world because I've always felt like my stuff was too weird or too hard to make funny in a traditional setup punchline.
Yeah.
And really diving into the deeper parts of my life would require a comfort that I didn't possess at the time.
Yeah.
Whereas now I'm like, all right, maybe I could get a little deeper and tell that story and really go into, like, there's the time, like when I did get arrested and I was getting transferred from jail to court for the bail hearing and how the U.S. Marshal called me nigger for 30 minutes straight.
Jesus.
From the jail all the way to the courthouse. And then
serious?
And then when I got bail and got free, he called me a lucky nigger.
It
was just looking. And then it's Tallahassee, so I end up working at Golden Corral. So a year and a half later,
oh my God,
guess who's one of my customers at my table?
That guy.
Fucking U.S. Marshals. and here's the part, like, of course it's heinous, it's racism, whatever. The part that hurt the most was that he didn't remember me.
Oh, that's devastating.
Which means you call everybody nigger. I
That's
thought
right.
I was special, bitch.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
You know, so
you thought it was a moment in his life where he crossed the line.
It's like you just call everybody nigger. Like, so there's there's an arc in that story.
Yeah.
Just in how, just how racism is just such a way of life for so many people that it's like saying hello to a stranger.
That's right.
But there ain't a lot of punchlines in that. Then to explore that story based on the current audience's mindset, I have to explain why I got arrested. I have to explain what I got arrested for. Then I have to have a moment of atonement within my joke to go, I shouldn't have been stealing. I shouldn't have been. So now we're 15 minutes on some sidetrack shit before I can get to the transport with the U.S. Marshal.
That's right. That's why you need me to produce the show.
Richard Pryor never went, no, I shouldn't have been smoking cocaine. But anyway, I was smoking cocaine. He just delivered it so matter-of-factly because people are on board with him because people knew who he was. And so when you start revealing layers of yourself,
that's right.
I think it only works if people already know you. Chris Rock, I don't think Chris Rock gets enough credit for the back half of Tambourine and how emotionally naked he was on that stage.
Unbelievable. Man. Beautiful.
He's never done that. He's never done that before.
He gets credit from people who I respect, though. I think that there's a certain group of people, you and me included, who get that Tambourine is one of the best comedy specials in the last 2 decades.
It's downright like a total shift. And it's beautiful because he starts one way, and it's a traditional Chris Rock special and we love him.
Yeah.
And then he just goes, oh, yeah, porn addiction, divorce, and here what else I'm dealing with.
I know.
So that's a slice from Mike Birbiglia's Working It Out Soundcast. And we're going to chat with him mouth to ear again, right after this quick word from our sponsor, Henderson's Summer Stock Slacks.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the lazy, hazy, crazy days of summer. Bill Hayward here to tell you about the latest invention from Henderson's Pants, Summer Stock Slacks. Just like those amazing Broadway shows that leave the Great White Way to hit the road and make money off the rubes in the flyover states, Henderson's Summer Stock Pants look great on the outside, but they're really cheaply made, using the flimsiest of materials and very little attention to detail. They look great on the outside from 20 feet away. Oh, but trust me, these suckers barely hold up past the first wearing. And by first wearing, I'm talking about the try-on in the dressing room. And once you wash them for the first time, you can just plan on throwing your brand new Henderson Summer Stock Slacks away. Ultra cheap to make. You'd think Henderson's would pass the savings on to you. But oh my goodness, no. These handsome but useless trousers are just as expensive as our top-of-the-line dress slacks. Originally designed for out-of-towners, yokels, and complete schlemiels, Henderson Summer Stock Slacks are available in little tourist shops wherever trinkets and tchotchkes are sold. That's Henderson's, makers of ephemeral garments and transitory togs since 1354. And now back to the unique permanence of Succotash.
Anyway, it's great to talk to you. I've been a fan for a long time, and I think we've probably featured your appearance on a couple of different podcasts on my show on Succotash.
Oh, thanks.
Succotash, what we do is, I actually started this show back in 2011 as a way to promote comedy podcasts. We actually call them soundcasts because we don't think Apple should be getting all that extra attention.
Oh, okay, now I get it.
But, so I started back in 2011 because nobody kind of knew what podcasts were. They were kind of dying on the vine. And
sure.
I like to think we were successful because now people know what they are. Apparently
the word is getting around. Well, that was a big thing when they launched Serial. Yes. Ira Glasses, and I don't remember what year that was exactly, but one of their big aims with Serial was to explain to people what podcasts are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, my mother has yet to hear about one of my shows. Been doing this for almost a decade. She goes, I don't know how to get it.
Yeah, my folks are the same. I think the only way my mom she heard part of the Roy Wood episode because she was in the car with my brother and he played it for her. And she liked it, so that's good.
Yeah, that's a plus. That's a plus. But let's start talking about your newest show. You're no stranger to podcasting, of course, but Working It Out. It's a fascinating show, and I've now reviewed it twice for Vulture because I think they're cool shows.
Oh, thanks.
But how'd the concept come up? And why don't you just explain a little bit about what the format's like?
It started in March when I was sort of pulled off the road from the world circumstance and from being a touring comedian. And actually, Roy Wood Jr. and I were on the phone. We were like, we got to do something to support these comedy club staffs because honestly, like, I feel like comedians can make it a few weeks without working, maybe a few months, but the staffs are a lot of them are week to week. And so we were like, let's come up with something. And we came up with this idea, which is Instagram Lives called Tip Your Wait Staff. And it was really fun. We did about 30 of them. We helped raise about $600,000 for comedy clubs across the country. It's still going, tipyourwaitstaff.com to support different GoFundMes. And then at a certain point, it just became a lot of the feedback was, I can't watch this at 4:00 on Tuesday, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Where can I find these? And of course, Instagram, like every platform, sort of has all the hoops to jump through to see what you record on there. And a lot of people don't have Instagram. So I was like, well, what's the most open source format that I can do this thing in? And so I just sort of rebranded it as Working It Out, and I added a few elements. So it's like working out new material, but then it's also like, I call it the slow round, where we ask questions like, what's the smell you remember from childhood, or a memory on a loop? And that's really, it's a few things. One is it sort of shows off the creative process of like, where do ideas come from, which is an idea as a writer you get all the time. And then because I think what happens is people start to think of their smell or their memory on a loop, and they go, oh yeah, okay, that's how comedy ideas evolve from your life. And then we give it's Working Out for a cause. We give to a nonprofit each episode. At this point, thousands of dollars, hopefully by the end of end of the year, a big check to a lot of different organizations. And we try to shine a light on what they're doing, And so like Roy Wood Jr., for example, that was like a literacy organization that he's volunteered for before, which I love that side of it because I feel like with nonprofits, so often you go like, you write a check for the Red Cross and we know they're doing a good job, but we're also kind of like, do we know anyone who works for the Red Cross? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like I don't personally. I think they're doing a great job, but so to hear Roy Wood say like, I've worked with this literacy organization, they're doing a great job. I think it's meaningful, and especially now. Geez, I mean, we're in just such strange times, and I feel like it has to be. Whatever we're doing has to have some component of it that's for the greater good.
I think that's great, and it's a nice switch up from what's become kind of the corporate sponsors of podcasts.
Sure.
Not to dig any of them, and glad podcasts are finally making some money. But I think it's a great way to give back, like you were talking about, particularly when the person that's on has that personal connection. You really feel like, well, he's helping out. I should help out.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Podcasting is just one of the many things you do. One of the things that I was aware of you, but when I really kind of said, I got to find out more about this guy, was when Marc Maron had his 500th episode and he had you interview him.
Yeah, I think it was 200th episode, actually.
Something like that. It was
Believe it or not, I think now he's on like 800 or 1,000.
Oh, he's over 1,000. He's probably...
It's wild.
Yeah. And he's had the President of the United States on. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But it's where I'd been hearing about you. I'd caught some of your stuff. But it was something fascinating about him wanting you to interview him, which was really interesting. And one of your Don't Think Twice movie about improv.
Yeah.
Really
and by the way, Marc is in my first feature film, Sleepwalk with Me.
Oh, of course he is. Yeah.
Marc plays like a veteran comedian, and he's very good.
Yeah. He's between his own TV show, Marin and Glow. He's actually gotten some chops. I mean, when I saw him in Joker, it was like, oh, this guy's arrived.
Yeah, he's a busy actor.
But your improv movie really touched me because I've been doing improv since like 1983.
Wow!
But it was the first time I could actually show my wife some semblance of what improv was like from the backstage perspective. Because I've been doing it for 20 years when I met her, and she would come to these shows and she didn't know anybody, and she'd be in the audience. She goes, I don't understand. Who are these people? You act like you've known them for years. I go, I have known them for years. I've just never introduced them to you. But I have to assume, and I just don't know this much about your background, that you have improv in your roots.
Yeah, I mean, I did the other day, I moderated a Q&A for Freestyle Love Supreme at Lincoln Center. And Freestyle Love Supreme is an improvised hip-hop show.
Yeah, I actually know one of the producers.
Oh, okay. So you know all about it. And,
Anthony Veneziale.
Oh, yeah. He and he's heavily featured in the Freestyle Love Supreme documentary too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's what we were talking about was this documentary, and I actually said, "Don't Think Twice." In some ways, is the narrative version that predates this documentary about Freestyle Love Supreme because it's so much about. Yeah. Don't Think Twice is all about how it's a group of best friends, and then someone sort of makes it onto a Saturday Night Live type show, and then everyone else doesn't. And it's all about how sort of life isn't fair in this very linear way. Yeah. And Freestyle Love Supreme is the same thing. I mean, it's like, if you watch the documentary, which is on Hulu, it's really good. I watched it a couple times now. You really get the sense of like, there's Lynn and, Lynn's in the stratosphere. And then there's other people who are really talented and they've chosen to raise the family, somewhere else, and or this person's gone off and become an actor, and this person's done this, and it's just an interesting sort of like meditation on how these groups don't last forever. And of course, like my version of that was that I was in a college improv group, the Georgetown Players, and we were doing, this is late 90s, we were doing like long form Chicago style improv, and I remember at the time we had a workshop my freshman year with Sharna Halpern from IO in Chicago, and it was it was late 90s, so it was like before UCB had its own theater, and it was long form improv was this sort of, I mean, now it's so common, but at the time it was sort of like, no, you do games improv,
right?
You do Whose Line Is It Anyway, sort of games improv, and then long form improv was sort of avant-garde. I mean, really, it was sort of like, oh, you're doing long form? Like it's such a big deal. And I loved it. And it was like, honestly, I talk about it in my podcast, like working it out, how like one of my slow round questions is like, what's a group that you were excluded from your whole life? And the other day, Ronnie Chang said, every group my whole life until comedy, essentially. And I totally related to that because before improv, I always felt a little bit on the outside of groups. But then, man, when I found improv, I was like, this is my family. And that's why in the movie, the improv group is called The Commune, and it's very much about like groups and family and all that stuff. And we moved to New York. We had a group called Little Man. Nick Kroll was in it, who's done extraordinarily well and is super talented. My friend Brian, Conrad, Ed, Chris, and ultimately we've all sort of gone our separate ways. But we had a blast doing shows at UCB and the Duplex and all those sort of like cabaret venues in the early 2000s.
And you never kind of lose that connection, right? I mean, I cut my teeth and I was running a comedy club in Seattle in the early 80s.
Wow.
And the local theater sports group, they just started from, they brought it down from Canada right? Keith Johnstone, the guy who wrote the Impro book.
Of course, Impro, yeah.
Yeah, and so they started this group in Seattle, and they got thrown out of their theater because there was a play going in. They came knocking on my door at the Comedy Underground and said, hey, do you have Monday nights dark? Can we go do it? And I said, yeah, you can do it, but you got to teach me how to do improv. So that's how I got in. And I got to play with Ryan Stiles from Who's Line.
Oh, yes, that's right.
He came down with the Vancouver team to play us on stage. And then I went down to San Francisco, and I ended up in the house improv group at the Punchline in San Francisco, which I ended up directing. And we had Greg Proops and Michael McShane were in our group.
What year?
This was 86.
No kidding, because my director of the new one, Seth Barish, who I've collaborated on a ton of things with, he used to play piano when they did improv sets at the Comedy Store in the early 80s.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
And that was like the Robin Williams would pop in, and, you know,
we did like a Saturday Night Live format, right? We'd have a stand-up do like 10 minutes, and then we'd do improv, and they'd play with us. And Robin was there like every third week. He would be in there. So,
I mean, he was one of, I'd say, like one of history's greatest improvisers.
Him, Jonathan Winters.
Yeah.
Others, you know, the legends. But the other thing I found about improv, and you probably echo this because of all the stuff you do, is that it became this amazing lubricant for all the other performance and writing and other things I've done.
Yes. That, and ultimately that's why I think I made the movie. Yeah.
Because I wrote some movies for the Hallmark Channel. And I literally pitched one of them to a producer while another one was being edited. He goes, hey, you got anything for Halloween? The channel's calling. And I pitched him this movie that I just completely made up on the spot. And it was all literally he was my audience, and I just watched him. And, you know, if it started to go kind of south, I'd change directions. And that got made into a movie. So improv's always
so fascinating. I think that what I always tell improvisers, because the improv and stand-up have this odd rivalry, right? Which has no basis in anything, in my opinion. You know, there's no reason that they should dislike each other or feel competitive around each other. But because I'm both, I'm an improviser and a stand-up. I love both. They have a lot of both have a lot of value. And what I always tell my improviser friends is, you can do stand-up too, you know. You can, but the audience is your scene partner.
Yes,
which is a little bit of a trick that I learned from an interview that Seinfeld did in the early '80s, where I listened to it on CD on Comedy with Jerry Seinfeld, where he says that, you know, the audience, it's like acting. The audience is your scene partner, and that's it's, you know, and so in a lot of ways, that when you watch those old Robin Williams specials, it's like watching him improvise with the audience.
Oh yeah. I mean, where I live here in Northern California, he lived 15 minutes away, and there's a little theater here that does comedy every Tuesday night, and he would show up if he was in town, and you could just watch him work. And I got to do improv with him on that stage up till like 6 months before he died.
Wow.
But watching him do that was just amazing, because he would first of all, he'd sit in the back. And he would watch the audience and kind of get the vibe. And then when he hit the stage, he knew where to go, because he was watching who was talking more, who was kind of not talking. And so he'd go after those people. Very educational to watch.
Yes.
So you've gotten into movies and TV. Oh, this was the other thing I want to talk about. Was there's something to me that's so wonderful to watch people of comedy sensibility get cast in things that are not overtly comedic. And when you did your work in Orange is the New Black.
Oh, yeah.
It was just such a great, refreshing take on what could have been kind of a miserable role, I think.
Yeah, Danny Pearson.
Yeah. And it was just this sort of, it was interesting because it was almost like the way you were playing the character was, he was almost kind of seemed delighted by the fact he was doing this job.
I always thought of his character as being a little bit like George W. Bush, where he he was this corporate executive who got the job because his dad had the job before him, and he meant well, but he was sort of doing an evil thing, and so I always thought George W. Bush was sort of a good model for that.
Well, that's cool. So a role like that, were you in auditions for that, or did they craft that for you? Because I think it was a little bit of both. I think it was where I wasn't auditioning for a lot of things at the time, and they said, "Hey, what would you think about doing this?" And I think I said, "Yeah, that seems good." And they said, "You'd have to read for it," but I read for it, and it just felt very natural. And then I think what they did is ultimately the writers sort of wrote towards the character as the seasons went on, so it was a little bit of a sort of a back and forth, which was fun. And then Nick Sandow, who played Caputo, who played opposite me in most of my scenes, he and I live in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn, so we'd share rides. Oh, no kidding! We'd
become pretty good friends over the years, and he gave me a lot of notes on the Don't Think Twice script, actually. So
really?
That's a really special show to me. Orange is the New Black.
Oh, that's cool. So
and then Natasha Lyonne and I actually met through the show, and then we produced Jacqueline Novak's solo show off Broadway together this year.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so there's something there too.
So it's and then of course I was listening to you and mentioned in my review about Roy Wood the idea of trying to get him to do a one-man show that you would like to do.
I know. That's what I want to do. I mean, Roy is just such a star. I mean, he has so much wisdom, and he's such a fountain of comedy and intelligence. And it's like, I just want to see it all bottled up in a 90-minute personal scree,
Yeah, like you pointed out in your show with him, is he never talks about himself in his act.
Yeah,
he's one of those comics that is always observational.
Yep.
And so that's very interesting because his stories he was relating on your show, and I'll have a link on the blog piece that goes with my show to that episode so people can catch it. And I did feature a clip from it actually a couple of episodes ago. But it's fascinating to hear what his life is like or was like, or
completely.
I guess is still like, right?
Well, yeah, he started in Birmingham, and he was arrested for stealing jeans and all this stuff. And I just thought thematically, in terms of like what that show would be about, is he's now a dad, and it's in some ways, it's a show he hasn't written yet, but about redemption and about forgiveness, and how do you forgiving yourself, and then how to teach your son, how to not make those mistakes, or if you make those mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and all that kind of thing.
It seems that like lessons are an important part of the things you're part of. I mean, when I watch your stand-up specials, your stories tend to go into these things where it's usually you learning a lesson.
It's hard with autobiographical work to have other people learn lessons. So that's when my wife realized that I was right.
I've seen comics try to force it down people's throats before.
Sure, yeah.
How did you get started? What was kind of your entree into comedy or any sort of performance medium?
So sort of a 1-2 punch of seeing Stephen Wright do stand-up live when I was 16. And that was when I started writing down jokes. I saw him at the Cape Cod Melody Tent. My brother Joe took me. And then 2 years later, as a freshman in college, I auditioned for the improv group. And then that became my whole life. So it was like I was working the door at the Washington, D.C. Improv Stand-Up Club. And I was doing improv. And it was my whole life. I mean, it just all-consuming. And then, here we are 22 years later. It's everything.
Yeah. A funny Stephen Wright story. When I was running the club in Seattle, he was headlining one week, and he said, "Hey, would you mind watching me do my show?" I go, "Well, yeah, I watch your set every night." He goes, "No, I mean, for some reason, I don't seem to be connecting with the audience. And could you just watch me?" I went, "Yeah, okay." Huh. So I'm watching his show, and he kind of goes into this zone when he's performing where he's looking towards the audience, but not looking at the audience.
Yes.
And I said, well, I talked to him after. I said, well, you move your body and your head like you're addressing the audience, but your eyes don't really connect with anybody. And you're like a submarine periscope kind of swiveling back and forth. And he kind of went, yeah, makes sense. And then he never changed his performance style after that.
That's fascinating.
But it was interesting that he wanted someone to give him some feedback.
Yeah. That is fascinating because that is what he does. He looks in the direction of the audience, but not at the audience.
Yeah.
Which, as opposed to Mitch Hedberg, who sort of like looks at the floor.
Yep, exactly. It's fascinating to me. I mean, having worked in comedy as a manager, comedy club manager, and then I've never actually done I've done stand up a little bit, but it's mostly improv. Although the funniest time was I was working on this screenplay with Dana Carvey, and he had to play in Vegas one weekend. He goes, well, why don't you come with me? I'll get you a room and we can keep working there. So I go, okay. So we fly to Vegas. He's working at the Mirage. And he goes, I got to go down and talk to the stage manager. So I hang out with him. We go down there, and he says to the manager, he says, who's my opening act? And the manager says, what do you mean? He says, well, the hotel, when they booked me, said, you guys have a local, somebody from Vegas. No, there's no opener.
That's funny.
They said you were going to bring your own opener.
No, that's funny.
And both he and Dana both look at me, and Dana goes, oh yeah, Mark can do it. So he and I write 7 minutes of just horrific topical material for the rest of the afternoon. And I opened for him for 3 nights at the Mirage.
That is a really cool story.
In Vegas in front of 1,300 people.
Wow.
And it was all improv that did it. I've tried to tell so many people how, and I actually teach improv in my day job now to people who work there.
Wow.
But the idea that you go out on stage and you own the stage, and somebody who has stage fright or someone in the audience doesn't understand the idea of ownership of stage.
Mm-hmm.
You go out there and you own it, and based on your confidence level, the audience buys it.
Yeah. Or doesn't,
depending how you carry it off. But it's fascinating, that idea of getting into it through stand-up and, like I said, the improv being the thing. So you got started that way, and then what led you into well, to me it seems obvious what leads you to these things, but for the listener's sake, how do you then segue into television and movies and these other interests that you have?
Well, when I was studying at Georgetown, I was studying screenwriting. And as a matter of fact, I was in a really extraordinary class of screenwriters. There was Jonah Nolan, who co-wrote the Batman movies and The Prestige. Jordan Goldberg, who went on to be a very successful producer. Jordan Nardino, who's a TV writer. A lot of working writers. And so I just thought I was going to be a screenwriter out of school. And then it got to be towards graduation, and I looked around and at the listings for jobs and realized, that's not a job. And then I was working the door at the Washington, D.C. Improv and opening for people like Jake Johansson and Brian Regan when they would come through town. Sure. And I just started looking at people's receipts of how much they were making, what the openers make. Opener makes $300 a week. The middle act makes $500 a week, whatever it is. And I just thought, well, I could be an opening act. I could just drive around the country and call myself and say I'm showing up. And it's literally what I did. And that's what my first movie, Sleepwalk With Me, is really based on that experience. And my first book is based on that experience, just driving around the country and sort of figuring it out. And then in terms of how that became TV, it's like at a certain point, I got on Letterman, I got on Comedy Central, I got a Comedy Central special, because, they have to fill those slots.
Someone has to do it.
Someone has to do those. And I was doing well with audiences, I'd spent so many hours in comedy clubs. And so I got the hang of it. And And then from there, it was sort of like, okay, well, this can circle back to film, which I had studied. I'd studied very seriously how to write screenplays. And so when I got the opportunity, Sleepwalk with Me was an off-Broadway show, and then Nathan Lane presented it, which was a huge coup, and it was a very lucky thing for me, and it was very generous of him. He did it for free, for nothing, and just to be supportive. And then, producers came around and said, well, what if this was a movie? And I said, I'd love it to be a movie. And then I sort of held out, much like Sylvester Stallone with Rocky. I held out to write it myself and direct it myself.
Smart move.
Yeah, and then here I am. I directed a pair of movies and some specials. About 4 specials at this point, I think.
Well, that's great. So you're working on the podcast now I'd actually stepped away from my podcast for a while. I was just producing it. I had my associate producer as the host. And then when the pandemic shut down, I said, I want to get back into this now because it's something to be doing. It gives you time to focus. And at the same time, it kind of steals focus because you're so amorphous. I love the thing Roy Wood said in the interview with you where he said, every day feels like either Tuesday or Thursday.
Oh, my gosh. Isn't that a great line? Yeah.
It's fantastic, and it's so real.
Well, the only reason why I was willing to do the podcast was that it feeds into my writing process. Because I for a period of time, I did a podcast called The Old Ones, where I go and I talk about someone's old comedy special. I talked to Hassan Minhaj about his special, or John Mulaney about his special, or we talk about one of my specials. And then what I realized when I was producing it is, oh my gosh, this is so much work. It's taking away from me writing. And so with this show, Working It Out, I'm literally writing for the show, and that writing is going to end up being in my next special. And so it's sort of it's oddly productive for a podcast.
That's great. That's a great way to do it. Exactly.
And then with someone like David Sedaris, it's like it's sort of an excuse to like ask David Sedaris or Hannah Gadsby for like tips on like, what do you think of this bit? And they throw you a tag and you're like, oh, I can keep that. Fantastic.
That's great. That's fantastic. What else do you have kind of slated to do once things in air quotes go back to normal?
I'm trying currently, this isn't for back to normal, but it's sort of for more of an inside, is I'm sort of trying to crack virtual. Like I'm doing my first virtual show on the 25th. I think it gets announced soon. And I'm really experimenting with like a multicam format with green screens and all these things. Like I'm trying to treat it like cinema and see what I can do. I mean, at first I was like, I'm never going to do a virtual show. And then I started to hear about like people doing virtual shows, and sometimes people in the audience are people, my friend Sam Morrill was saying, like, there was a guy in the audience in one of his virtual shows that had brain cancer. There's people who can't leave the house because they can't walk or whatever the thing is. And you go like, oh, that is a complete and total reason to crack this virtual format.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Maria Bamford was doing these Zoom rehearsals from her living room, which was fascinating. And it was like limited to 100 people. And it was, she would turn on the mics at the end and talk to people. It was cool. I watched it a couple of times. Very interesting.
Yeah, she's brilliant. I mean, she's actually on an upcoming episode of Working It Out, and
good.
No one makes me laugh harder than Maria.
She's great. I was just watching her stuff she was doing for Arrested Development again recently, and just so funny.
Yeah, she's just something crazy. Else.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you. I know it's still a busy time for all of us, but you're busier than most, and I want to thank you for taking the time out to chat with me.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Succotash Shut-In.
Thanks, Mark.
The Soundcast Stimulus Package, as I like to call it. And best of luck, and I look forward to seeing you whatever you come out with next.
All right, thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
This episode of Succotash is sponsored in part by TrumPoetry.com, a chronological ode to a fake muse. Enjoy a rhyming spin on the news of the day every day, as well as over 500 archived daily verses thoroughly covering the White House, America, and the world with a sticky caramel coating that's impossible to remove. That's TRUMPoetry.com. Everything you need to know in rhyming couplets. TrumPoetry.com.
Big thanks to Mike Birbiglia for taking the time out of his busy day to chat for a bit. You can catch his Soundcast Working It Out with Mike Birbiglia on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, or right from his own home site if you like, Birbigs.com. That's BIRBIGS.com. If you liked what you heard here today, don't be afraid to stop by Apple Podcasts to rate and review our show. That's Succotash Show. Tyson Saner will be back next week with a Pass-a-Low comedy Soundcast clips. And in the meantime, stay safe, breathe shallow, and remember to please pass the Succotash.
You've been listening to Succotash Shut-In, the Soundcast Stimulus Package, with your host, Marc Hershon. Brought to you by Henderson's Pants, TrumPoetry.com, and imagine your company's name right here. Find us on the web at SuccotashShow.com, on iTunes, on Stitcher, on iHeartRadio, on YouTube, on SoundCloud, on the laughable app, and tattooed on your mother's rear end. You can hear us streaming and like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Succotash Show. Email us at marc@succotashshow.com. Or call into the Succotash Skype line at our toll call number 818-921-7212. You can also upload clips from your favorite comedy soundcast directly to us using our direct upload link at hightail.com/u/succotash. Production of Succotash is overseen by Joe Paulino through the auspices of Studio P. Sausalito, the home of the hit. Our hosts are Marc Hershon and Tyson Saner. Our musical director is Scott Carvey. Our booth assistant is still Kenny Durgis. And until next time, I'm your loyal booth announcer, Bill Haywatt, reminding you to please wash your hands and pass the Succotash. Goodbye. This has been a Succotash Patch production.